Okay, let's unpack this. Is being Christian just about saying, I believe, or does it really demand actively living out that faith?
That's a huge question, and it's not new, right?
Not at all. Jesus himself pointed to it, didn't he? When he critiqued some aspects of Judaism at the time.
Exactly, focusing on the underlying the spirit of the law rather than just, ticking boxes.
And this whole belief versus action thing, it's still incredibly relevant today.
Absolutely. So today on the deep dive, we're exploring exactly that relationship, especially in Christian and Jewish thought.
Yeah, and we're drawing from that really interesting discussion between Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro.
Right. It was quite something.
Our goal here is really to pull out the core insights from what they talked about, things like salvation, suffering, the values underpinning Western culture.
And hopefully make it clear and engaging for you, the listener. We want those aha moments.
Exactly. So are you ready to get into it?
Let's do it. Let's start with Peterson's take on Christianity, that central idea about responsibility.
Right. He really hammers home this idea of facing the darkness, the malevolence inside us and in the world.
And willingly accepting hardship, that whole taking up the cross concept.
For Peterson, Christ is the ultimate example of this, isn't he? Taking the world's suffering onto himself.
And urging others to do the same, basically. It's a call to responsibility.
So Peterson's saying true faith isn't passive. It demands embracing hardship, taking up your own cross.
That's the essence of responsible living in his view, not just saying you believe.
He even has that challenging idea about reading history.
Oh, yeah. Reading it as if you were the perpetrator.
It's about acknowledging our own capacity for bad things.
And he argues this isn't just some abstract thought exercise. Taking on this burden actually leads to growth.
Like real personal growth, competence, social skills.
Exactly. And maybe even something deeper, like a psychophysiological or spiritual transformation.
Okay, but then Shapiro comes in with a different angle, more from a traditional Christian theological view.
Right. Here's where they diverge a bit. Shapiro essentially argues that humans, we just can't overcome sin entirely on our own steam.
So we're fundamentally incapable.
According to this perspective, yes. Which makes Christ's role absolutely essential.
No, so.
Because Christ is seen as the singular figure who takes on that suffering for humanity.
Providing the way out, sort of, the capacity to withdraw from original sin.
Precisely. And Shapiro feels this aligns more, maybe paradoxically, with a Judaic emphasis on individual accountability for sins.
Interesting. So he questions that idea of a suffering servant, completely removing personal responsibility.
Yeah, he sees a tension there. If humans are incapable, how do you square that with biblical calls for accountability? It's tricky.
That really does highlight a core difference in understanding salvation.
Definitely. And Peterson notes, even within Christianity, there isn't one single view on this.
I already you mentioned the differences.
Yeah, like distinguishing between, say, Protestant and Catholic views, often emphasizing Christ's sacrifice for salvation.
Versus the Orthodox tradition.
Which, as he points out, might put more weight on the individual imitating Christ, following his example in their own life.
So it creates this kind of paradox, especially in Protestant thought.
How so?
Well, you're redeemed through Christ's sacrifice, but the moral burden, the need to act rightly, doesn't just vanish.
Right. You still feel that way.
It makes you think about all those different verses, doesn't it? Like, Luke, take up your cross daily.
But then 1 Peter says Christ bore our sins.
And Romans talks about becoming like Christ.
And then James flat out says faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely not simple. A very complex picture.
And this whole tension, this push and pull between our effort and God's grace, Dostoevsky nailed it, didn't he?
Oh, the Grand Inquisitor section in the Brothers Karamazov.
Exactly. It explores that burden of freedom, the weight of Christ's moral ideal.
Yes, where Christ returns and the Inquisitor basically arrests him.
And tells him off, saying, look, you ask too much of people. This standard is too high, too burdensome.
So the Inquisitor's solution was what? To make it easier.
Pretty much. Water down the ideal, provide intermediaries, give people miracles, mystery, authority, things they can handle.
Less burden, more structure.
Right. But then Christ's response, that silent kiss, and the Inquisitor letting him go.
It leaves the door open, doesn't it? The ideal is still there, even if the burden feels lessened.
Precisely. The possibility remains.
Which brings us back to that common distinction. Judaism as acts-based, Christianity as faith-based. Is that too simple?
Well, it's the usual one-liner, isn't it? And there's some truth there. Judaism certainly emphasizes mitzvot, the commandments.
As a way to perfect oneself. Fulfill your responsibility in the world.
Yes, and Peterson brings up that fascinating idea of Jewish atheists.
People who connect primarily through the actions, the traditions, even without the theological belief.
Exactly, which is quite a concept.
Whereas Christianity, maybe after the initial expectation of a transformed world didn't quite happen.
It sort of redefined the Messianic era more as a new spiritual status rather than a completely changed earthly reality.
But despite these differences, there's still that huge overlap, the Judeo-Christian value system.
Absolutely, a vast amount of shared ethical ground.
And Peterson's point that Christians often seem to, almost retroactively, apply an acts-based logic.
Yeah, like seeing good works as evidence that they are truly saved, part of the elect.
It underlines how just saying Lord, Lord isn't enough, as Jesus warned. Mere intellectual assent isn't the whole story.
So if just stating belief isn't enough, how does real belief show itself?
Well, Peterson seems to agree with Nietzsche's criticism here.
That there aren't many truly Christians in the sense of fully living it out.
Right. For Peterson, belief isn't just a thought. It's what you stake your life on.
Manifested in action.
And specifically in taking on that burden of suffering and malevolence as your own responsibility. That is the belief in action.
Which connects neatly to Shapiro's point about Western values.
Ah, the Judeo-Christian roots. He argues that even secular values in the West grew out of this, 3,000-year tradition?
Yeah, that shared history is foundational, he suggests. Even atheists, he says, are kind of living off the fumes of that heritage.
It's a strong claim.
And he stresses teaching the stories, the myths, to kids as a way to ground those values.
Arguing that even the Enlightenment wasn't built in a vacuum, but on that pre-existing bedrock.
It definitely challenges purely evolutionary explanations for morality, asking us to consider the deep cultural history.
And Peterson's idea of literary truth fits here too, doesn't it?
That these ancient stories, even if not literal history in every detail, capture essential patterns of human behavior.
They offer guidance, like abstractions of how to live well. The Moses story as an archetype, for instance.
Exactly. The pattern holds truth, even if the specifics are composite or debated.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to the resurrection. Peterson sees it as more than just history, right?
Yeah, very much so. He calls it the axiom of Christian history, the event that gives meaning to everything else, especially the cross.
He acknowledges the historical evidence is actually pretty strong compared to other ancient events.
Yeah, surprisingly strong, comparable to Caesar crossing the Rubicon or the death of Augustus, things we take as historical fact.
But skepticism often comes down to a bias against the miraculous itself.
That seems to be his point. A pre-existing assumption that such things can't happen.
It's that fundamental clash, isn't it? Believing something beyond the everyday explanation.
And Peterson makes that interesting comparison that every account of existence, even the scientific ones like the Big Bang, eventually hits a point of unexplained origin.
Like physics can describe what happened after the Big Bang, but not what caused the Big Bang itself, or where space-time came from.
Right. There's always an underlying mystery, something taken on faith. In a way.
So he argues the resurrection offers meaning for existence, sacrifice, love, in a way that materialism struggles with.
Yes, he suggests purely materialist views can lead to a crisis of meaning because they don't easily account for these deeper human experiences.
He even brings in Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
As an analogy, yeah. That any system needs truths from outside itself to be complete.
So the miraculous isn't necessarily breaking the rules of reality.
But maybe how phenomena become meaningful. In a way, the phenomena alone can't explain.
The resurrection then becomes this image of reality itself, fragmented things coming together into something higher, something meaningful.
It's a powerful image. He even mentioned Elon Musk wondering how consciousness arises from basic matter, another example of that inexplicable unfolding.
And this ties into that biblical pattern of redemption.
Yes, the narrative shows that total self-giving, total sacrifice leads paradoxically to life, not death. That's the definition of eternal life.
He draws that parallel between Eve bringing death into the world.
And Christ, the son of Eve, ultimately destroying death. It's a confrontation with evil, not a separation from it.
So engaging with the darkness, not running from it.
And the resurrection becomes the proof, the foundation, showing that self-giving love triumphs and leads to life everlasting.
Okay, so Peterson sees a problem now, though, with Enlightenment ideas may be turning on themselves.
Yeah, he argues that some of the principles that initially challenged religion are now creating their own problems.
He uses that psychological insight that we all need a story to make sense of the world, to direct our attention.
Without a story, what's the point? No aim, no way to organize your actions. It leads to despair, potentially.
And he thinks the replacement stories aren't great. Power and sex.
He sees those as dominant motivators now, but argues they can lead to, well, either hedonism or a pretty grim, power-obsessed world if they aren't integrated into something higher.
Which is where the religious or monotheistic question comes back in for him.
Right. Can something unite even those powerful drives in a harmonious way?
And sacrifice is key to this integration.
He sees sacrifice as central to maturing, to growth. The spirit of progressive sacrifice underlies building communities, integrating ourselves.
And the gospel story is the ultimate sacrificial story.
That's his reading. It calls you to bear the weight of tragedy and malevolence.
He even suggests the climax of the New Testament might just be God is love.
Which sounds simple, but it's profound. If love is willing the good of the other,
then the whole sacrificial story of the cross fits under that umbrella.
He even muses that the Trinity could stem from that lover, beloved, the love shared between them.
So Christ's story, the worst possible death, out of love, for people who didn't deserve it, becomes the ultimate expression of that love.
It provides that guiding vision, that revelation the proverb talks about, without which people cast off restraint.
Now, looking at the Bible itself, not just the concepts, Peterson acknowledges its literary power, right, even for non-believers.
Oh, absolutely. Its aesthetic beauty is undeniable. But he argues you can't just appreciate the beauty without implicitly engaging with its underlying ideas.
So enjoying the poetry means, on some level, grappling with the premises.
That's his take. He finds Genesis, up to Babel and Exodus, particularly rich.
And highlights that idea of humans being made in God's image.
As the absolute cornerstone of our legal system, our sense of intrinsic value.
And he worries about postmodern critiques chipping away at that foundation.
Yeah, if you remove that, does law just become about power? Pragmatism? He echoes Nietzsche's warning. Remove God, and the whole structure might crumble.
He feels many atheists haven't really wrestled with these real problems that the Bible tackles head on.
And he suggests abandoning religion doesn't automatically make people rational.
It might even lead to more irrationality.
That's his concern. He mentions Jung's idea. Everyone acts out a myth, but most don't know their myth.
So it's crucial to understand your own guiding story and whether it's actually leading somewhere good.
He sees this pattern, acting out principles, then imagining them, then codifying them, like Moses and the Ten Commandments or English common law evolving from practice.
And that archaic idea of God as almost the dominant principle manifested in society.
Yeah, before it became more abstracted, the pattern of how things should be ordered.
Which brings us back to law, morality, and this idea of being made in God's image, not just a human invention.
No, he argues it's tied to something transcendent. He challenges whether atheism can truly account for our deep sense of justice or the value we place on each life.
Leading to that big question about consciousness. Does it have a role in reality itself?
He leans towards yes. He emphasizes how incredibly complex humans are, our ability to imagine, to create.
And points out Genesis 1 says both men and women are made in God's image.
Which is significant. He uses Dostoevsky again, Crime and Punishment, showing the horror of denying intrinsic human value.
And the devils as almost a prophecy of the dangers of atheistic utopias, later documented by Solzhenitsyn.
It raises that profound possibility. Does consciousness connect us to something divine, present in everyone? What happens if we dismiss that?
Ultimately, Peterson concludes the Bible is, well, psychologically true.
Deeply correct, yeah. He says the more you dig into the stories, the more truth you find. Layers upon layers.
And he sees that shift from the Old Testament focus on the state
to the New Testament, focus on the individual state of being, their inner transformation, as the locus of redemption.
And he believes our whole Western emphasis on the individual stems directly from that shift.
That the individual soul is paramount, more important than the state.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've really traversed a lot of ground. Faith in action, salvation, the roots of our values.
Yeah, contrasting perspectives on responsibility, sacrifice, the divine. It really offers a lot to chew on regarding our own beliefs and the stories shaping our world.
And hopefully for you listening, it provides some new angles, maybe some clarity on these foundational ideas.
So the thought to leave you with is this. What is the underlying story that's actually guiding your life?
How does your own understanding of responsibility, sacrifice, maybe even the divine, shape how you act and see things?
Perhaps the deeper we really dig into these ancient texts and ideas, the more surprisingly relevant they become for navigating life today.